We're back for episode 2 of the Fishbowl Hockey Podcast. I'm your host, Larry Fisher, and today we're talking World Juniors with my former junior teammate, Dan Nadeau. Thanks for jumping on the show, Dan.
Hey, no problem, Larry. It's always a pleasure to chat hockey with you anytime we can. So,
For sure, we go way back, and you've had a lot of cool experiences in hockey over the years, including coaching some of the kids who will be starring in this year's World Juniors. We'll get into that, but tell us a bit about DNA Hockey and what you're up to these days.
yeah, DNA Hockey's a company I started here in the Edmonton area. Myself and my instructors that go out, we focus on stick handling and shooting. I've been pretty fortunate to be able to partner up with the shooting legend that is Tim Turk out in the Ontario area, and I get to work with some pros too, and work with them and learn from Tim just how he handles some of his NHL clients. So it's been pretty neat for me.
Yeah, very cool. And you do a lot of skill development, even with the minor hockey groups, and like I said, you even travel out to different towns, and there's a lot of ways to find you or track you down, book your services.
Absolutely, my website's just dnahockeydev.com. You can find me there, Facebook, Instagram, all the same. So yeah, pretty easy to find me and get me out for anybody that needs a little bit of help with some stick handling and shooting.
And obviously, still coaching some of the next generation, the guys that are coming up. Talk a little bit about where you're coaching these days.
Yeah, I'm actually coaching the 14U Titans Hockey Union in the Junior Prospects Hockey League here. The league spans from BC, Alberta into southern Saskatchewan there, and opportunity to work with some BCHL teams as well as we're kind of the AP system for that league, being an independent model ourselves. So it's been pretty neat. There's a lot of talent coming through the league. Potential second overall or first overall pick, Liam Pugh, is currently playing in the U18 division in our league. So there's definitely some talent there for sure that we may see on some future rosters at this tournament one day.
That's what I was going to say. We might recognize some of those names in the years to come at the World Juniors, and this really is the most wonderful time of the year, Dan. Or next to the Oilers playing in the Stanley Cup Final. I know you got to enjoy that ride this past year all the way to Game 7. But nothing beats the World Juniors for entertainment at this time of the year. We've got so many great memories from this tournament. Obviously, the Eberle equalizer, that Taves Price shootout. We're even old enough to remember the 2005 Dream Team with Sidney Crosby. I believe you could have been on that team if I'm not mistaken, Dan. That would have been your 19-year-old season.
It could have been, yeah. Definitely not a World Junior guy. I don't think I was on any radar. There wouldn't have been a big enough one to probably get me in the net, but it's always fun to wake up Boxing Day and get the eggnog flowing again and watch Canada play. Thankfully, it's in Canada this year, so it's more PM games than 6 a.m. games when they're in Europe. But it's always fun to get up and cheer on the Canadian boys. So.
For sure. Tournaments in Ottawa this year, like I said, primetime games, and you'll get to cheer on another Nadeau this year, former Penticton v. Bradley Nadeau. No relation there, just to double check, right?
No relation. Obviously, stole all the good Nadeau hockey genes, though. I got the average ones.
But it does look like he'll have a big role for Canada. He's on loan from the Carolina Hurricanes. I know he wasn't part of the selection camp, but he's there now. He's been practicing on the top line, top power play unit since joining Team Canada, and he's the only player on Canada's roster that is on loan from pro this year. Obviously, guys like Connor Bedard, Macklin Celebrini, Zach Benson are still age eligible for this tournament, but they're obviously sticking with their NHL clubs. It is a younger team in general. There's a few underagers that crack the roster. We'll talk about them specifically as we go along, some draft eligible guys. But what are your thoughts on how that lineup has taken shape, and are you confident in this Team Canada on paper heading into the tournament?
In Canada and the junior level of confidence or expectation that they're going to medal. We'll probably get to it later. There are definitely some noticeable guys that aren't there. You look at the depth, and I guess the one thing that stands out for me is you potentially have, three scoring lines there and sort of one checking line, which depending on who's picking the team some years, sometimes they have two checking lines, two scoring lines. The back end, Uh, we're missing a couple offensive guys there. I think our strength's going to lie in our goaltending this year. Actually, believe it or not, I've had the pleasure of watching all three of these gentlemen live in Bjarnson George and Ivan Kovic, and it wouldn't a chance if he kind of stole the crease. I watched him at the Halinka this year, and that guy's a beast, and he's hard to beat. And Bjarnson, obviously, in Brandon, I've had the ability to watch him through the Western League. And Carter George, I actually got to watch growing up in Ontario. I was living there while he was still playing out there. There's just three really, really solid goaltenders, and goaltending's always been like, if Canada's goaltending does what Carey Price does, which I know is hard to do, it's kind of been the backbone of our nation for a while. I know, not to get away from the juniors, but at the pro level, we're scratching our heads right now trying to figure out who's playing on the Olympic team. But we look to be in good hands with these three in the crease right now.
Definitely some talent coming up in the pipeline. I know Sebastian Cosa's having a good AHL year, made his NHL debut, a guy who played for the Edmonton Oil Kings. He was sort of a mid-round, first-round pick. And you mentioned Jack Ivankovic. Believe he's projected on a lot of lists to be a first-round pick this year, as is Joshua Ravensbergen, who I've seen last night live again, second live viewing this year here in Kelowna when the Prince George Cougars came through town. 5-3 win for Ravensburg, and made a couple big saves along the way. But those and like I said, Carter George obviously had a great showing at the U18 Worlds in April or May, and then and obviously Carson Bjarnason's a top prospect out of Brandon in the WHL. So we'll talk a little bit more about goaltending as we go, but I think you're right. That could be one of the keys to this year's team, and maybe stronger than it's been in recent years, depending who ends up taking the crease there. Even like I said, Ivan Kovic, as the youngest of the three, could end up being the starter. He's been really clutch for Canada on the international stage, so that could be a good call there. As a coach, Dan, you've had a hand in picking a lot of teams and putting together rosters. It's not always about taking the best players, but rather building the best team. As you mentioned, that means kind of rostering some role players as opposed to just an all-star team. Talk about that process and also the risk of overthinking those decisions, or how you would have approached this roster, putting yourselves in the shoes of guys like Al Murray, Peter Anholt, and obviously the head coach Dave Cameron.
Yeah, I mean, again, getting back to maybe some of the surprises in like a Riley Height or Andrew Crystal not being there, even a Zane Perek. I've had the pleasure of coaching Bo Akey in an international event myself when he was just a little guy in Pee Wee. Great kid, works hard. I like his game. I can see him maybe being an offensive guy with a Mollendijk. Akey's not gonna like probably get you a ton of goals, but makes a great first pass. Hits like a truck. Can kind of give Mollendijk that safety net, if you will, to wheel and deal and do the things that he's kind of known for in the Western Hockey League, right? Bonk's another guy, obviously going to be counted on maybe to chip in offensively. You get to see Caden Price a little more out in Kelowna, so I'll let you touch on him because I've had limited viewing. Another guy that's there, it doesn't shock me, but I think it's really good for the program and moving forward is a Matthew Schaefer. Again, gotten a chance to watch him with the Hamilton Junior Bulldogs program when he was still playing minor hockey there in Ontario. Elite at everything he does. No question. He's probably a first overall guy this year. Is he going to get the minutes to make a difference? That really depends. I know it's a 19-year-old tournament, but it wouldn't shock me if Schaefer steps up in those moments. Moving to the forwards, I guess Tanner Howe and Berkeley Catton and Nadeau are obviously guys that have some familiarity being in the West and getting to kind of play with each other. Yager's another guy that got to play last year a little bit, and I get to work with him in the summer, and hopefully he could put some goals in and make all the shooting stuff look good for us there. The one for me, kind of a shock, not there. Well, three guys really: Misa, Height, and Christel. Like I don't know what else Andrew Christel could have done this year to make this team. I mean, the guy's on fire. He almost made Washington out of camp. Misa's leading the CHL in goals. as we know in hockey, like goals are hard to get. And when you're leaving guys at home that are just natural goal scorers, that worries me a little bit. There's nothing wrong per se with this forward lineup, but you've left a couple guys at home that are just killers around the net, and that's where I'm saying like our goaltending hopefully plays at their level, because I think we're going to be in a lot of 2-1, 3-2 games trying to find goals with this roster. Not that there's no talent here, but you left some pure snipers just sitting at home.
Yeah, and it's obviously a big talking point. The cuts or the snubs. You mentioned even a returning guy like Matthew Wood, who was on the team last year, got cut.
Right.
Another guy, third overall pick, Beckett Seneke. He wasn't even invited to the selection camp. Then there was an injury. Easton Cowan was held out. He's actually going to be on the roster, be a go-to guy for Canada, but he took a heck of a hit in the OHL and was held out of selection camp. Didn't participate in the on-ice stuff, so they brought Beckett Seneke, who was on fire, scored one of the goals of the year so far, to kind of force his way into that camp, but didn't end up making the team. And obviously, you mentioned Andrew Crystal, Riley Heidt. I got to see them go head-to-head in the WHL again last night. Even though Kelowna lost 5-3, another 3-point performance for Andrew Crystal, 2 goals and a primary assist on Joshua Ravensbergen, who's potentially a top 15 draft pick in this year in the upcoming NHL draft in 2025. So Crystal's on a tear. He's by the time the World Juniors are over, he's going to be far ahead of Gavin McKenna as the WHL scoring leader, just because McKenna's obviously going to be busy helping Team Canada as another underager who's not draft eligible until 2026, and we'll talk more about McKenna. But yeah, definitely surprising for me that Andrew Crystal wasn't there. Riley Heidt has the chemistry with Braden Yeager from growing up in the Saskatoon area, or that Saskatoon major midget program together. So I thought maybe they would be reunited. Thought maybe they'd be reunited in the WHL as well, but obviously Braden Yeager went to Lethbridge instead of Prince George. And the other big one out of the dub that was a surprise to me was Carter Yakimchuk. Tournaments in Ottawa. He's a top 10 pick this year for the Ottawa Senators. Had a really good showing in the preseason with Ottawa, almost made the Sens or got to stick out of camp. So definitely surprising that he wasn't in the mix on the back end. But I think the more I look at the defense that's there, I think, like I said, Caden Price, the guy I'm familiar with in Kelowna, a lot of people here are surprised that Price made it and Crystal didn't. They thought either both or maybe Crystal would make it over Price. But good for Caden, another guy who came out of that Saskatoon major midget program. So good for him to be there in Ottawa. It'll be a great experience for him, even if he's not necessarily one of the top 6D. It'll be interesting to see how those pairs come down. Looks like they're going with the all Nashville pairing of Tanner Melendick with the big guy, Andrew Gibson. Apparently he's going to be kind of the Jake Middleton of Team Canada. He's rocking the mustache. He's going to be an interesting guy to watch. Andrew Gibson, more of a shutdown guy. And then Sam Dickinson out of the OHL powerhouse London Knights. He's going to be a go-to guy on the back end there as well. But definitely some of the guys, Zane Perek, you mentioned as well as another top 10 pick that was cut. And then even a guy like Michael Hage out of the NCAA Michigan and Michael Misa, the two Michaels that are scoring leaders for their age group or for their peers that were left off that roster. And even Ravensbergen, he had a really good showing for the CHL USA Prospects Challenge, almost got a shutout there. So, but as you know, Dan, if they win gold, all the second guessing over the snubs will be a moot point. But if they get eliminated in the quarterfinals like last year, or Canada doesn't medal, it's always gold or bust for Canada at this tournament, especially as the host in Ottawa. There'll be more debating over whether this was the best team that Canada could have iced, or, like you said, did they leave too many goals at home?
Yeah, and I guess obviously there's regional biases, and I'm not saying that happened with Dave Cameron and some of the OHL guys he took over the Western guys, and we probably feel that in the West, but I watched the OHL a lot living there. I've watched the Western Hockey League. It's tough. I mean, the West is known for their defense first hockey, and when you've got guys like Height and Crystal lighting up the dub, it put these guys in a more freewheeling open tournament and watch what they can do. And doesn't always equate to success for sure, but it's one of those things where I'm always left scratching my head when a leading scorer in the WHL somehow isn't on Canada's roster, because it's such a tough league to get points in, and you just think that would equate to more success in a more open format that some of these Europeans and even the Americans, not to say they're they're not going to be good defensively, but it's just a little bit more wide open tournament for some of these high skill guys to freewheel in, right?
For sure. And I think you're right. I think Dave Cameron's familiarity with the OHL shows in the roster. Obviously, a guy like Callum Ritchie, who started the year with the Colorado Avalanche. Carson Rakoff is going to have a big role as a guy that can score and put the puck in the net. Obviously, Jet Luchenko also started the year with the Philadelphia Flyers. And then the young guy, I mean, we talked about Matthew Schaefer on defense being in the conversation for first overall. We've mentioned Michael Misa not being at the tournament, potentially in that conversation as well. But Porter Martone is the big-bodied power forward, that power winger that I think is going to make a big impression in this tournament. Another guy out of the OHL who can put the puck in the net. And obviously the X factor here for Canada potentially, Dan, is the youngest player on the roster, in Gavin McKenna. As we mentioned, not draft eligible until 2026. By far the favorite to go first overall in 2026. And we're getting spoiled here in the West with, I know we don't want to overuse generational talent, but going from Connor Bedard to Gavin McKenna, and we got Landon Dupont coming up as another exceptional talent. I've got a live viewing of Landon Dupont in the WHL already this year. I don't know how close he was to being in the conversation to potentially be at this selection camp, but this time next year, everyone's going to know who Landon Dupont is, and definitely he's going to be a guy that'll be a multi-year star for Canada at the World Juniors. But with Gavin McKenna, do you expect him to play a key role or potentially even dominate this tournament the way he did the U18s in the spring? Or who do you expect to step up and kind of be the scoring leader for this Canadian roster?
I think McKenna has to. I think he's one of the most potent offensive threats we have. I know he's younger than some of these guys and maybe a little bit less experienced at an international level per se, but I mean, like, this is really the first taste of sort of that, I don't know, big boy pro hockey international stuff that a lot of these guys are going to get. You're going to have to lean on McKenna. You're going to have to lean on probably Bradley Nadeau, Callum Ritchie, Yager, guys like that. Berkeley Catton, another guy that I think has the ability and the offensive skill. I got to watch him a little bit growing up through the WSI tournaments and stuff too, where I've been able to coach with some of these guys. So again, I don't dislike the forward group. I'm just a little bit shocked at a couple of the leave-offs, right? And it's it's going to be scoring by committee, I think, and it has to be. If they're able to find that and do that, then they'll find success. It's interesting you bring up the quarterfinals. I'll probably touch on a couple teams as we get through that, but they could have a pretty tough battle in the quarterfinals depending on the round robin. So.
Definitely, and it is going to be a competitive tournament. Again, Canada does have a younger roster than usual with some of the 06s and even into the 07s that are on this roster. Definitely, guys. Like I said, they did take some more role players or some heavier sort of bottom six forwards, guys like Cole Beaudin and Ethan Gaucher and Matthew Cataford. Dave Cameron's captain in Ottawa. Luca Pinelli's on the roster. So yeah, you got guys like that where, like you mentioned, some of the guys that are at home watching this tournament with us maybe could have made a bigger impact. But when you look at the defense, we kind of went through it talking about different pairings. I think young Matthew Schaefer, you mentioned, it looks like they're going to start him off with Oliver Bonk. Obviously, Bonk, the returnee on defense, another guy from the London Knights who's just a real stabilizing force back there, probably play penalty kill and really let Matthew Schaefer play his game as a more offensive-minded guy. I think Schaefer's even right now, he's quarterbacking the top power play unit, or one of the two power play units in practice. So that'll be interesting to see. And again, it's going to be interesting the deployment of Gavin McKenna, because the last time Mark Masters, who's kind of the go-to guy behind the scenes for Team Canada, Mr. World Juniors Mark Masters, he posted the line combos from yesterday's practice, and McKenna was sort of cycling through on the fourth line, 13th forward with Tanner Howe, and McKenna were alternating with Luchenko and Cataford. Obviously, we would expect McKenna to be higher in the lineup, but they got Bradley Nadeau with Callum Ritchie and Easton Cowan as the top line. I think that line could do a lot of damage. And then come back with Rakoff, Berkeley Catton, and they got Porter Martone on that wing. And then, as we mentioned, Braden Yager's kind of more in a third line checking role with Cole Beaudin and Ethan Gaucher. But I'm sure those lines will change through the pre-tournament games, which we'll get next week. And then when the real bullets start to fly on Boxing Day against Finland, which not an easy opening game. Like I said, it's going to be interesting through the pre-tournament which goaltender grabs the net because you got to hit the ground running when your first opponent is Finland on Boxing Day.
Yeah, the Finns pack a little bit of a punch there. Speaking on their roster, I was just looking at here. Um, they look to be pretty solid in goal if Saarinen can kind of keep what he's doing in Liga going at this tournament. Kind of a notable like not guy there is Vinny, the Oiler draft pick that we're hoping can come in here into Edmonton in the future and help push Skinner a little bit and battle for that crease. He played at the Halinka for them. I got to watch that one in Red Deer. So the Finns aren't going to be a slouch in this round robin. My one of my all-time favorite D ever. I know we talk about him at length. Like Aaron Kiviharju's there. He's healthy this year. He's looking good in Liga. I mean, it's tough to play in that league at any age, and he's an 06D. He's playing big minutes. He's making good. Like he's very rare that he makes a mistake. He's confident. He's poised with the puck. His breakout passes are tape to tape. So I think Finland's going to kind of go as Aaron goes, and he's going to be the leader there, the emotional leader. Whether or not he wears a letter, I'm not sure on that one yet. Haven't had the opportunity to speak with him or his dad. They're kind of busy with the camp, right? Obviously, but there's a guy that I think has a lot to prove. Projected top sort of 5-10 pick. Was even in the conversation for a couple of years as like a 1-2-3 guy, and unfortunately just suffered some injuries at some inopportune times, and it dropped his stock shockingly all the way to the fourth round. But gotta love his confidence getting up there and shaking Billy Guerin's hand in the fourth round, walking on the floor, going, "You just got the biggest steal of the draft." So definitely some swagger in that kid that you love to see if you're an NHL GM. And I think again they're going to kind of go as he goes. There's a few other NHL draft picks on the back end there that are no slouches either. And then looking into their forwards, I mean, Haltunen, London Knight, and Jose, Hellenius, Emil Hemming, right? There's one undrafted player here that I want to touch on. His name's Tapias Heinonen. He's playing Liga right now as an 05, and he is sitting at 24 points in 32 games in the top pro league in Finland. I mean, what kind of a role are they going to give him? I don't know. I'm not in the Finnish war room there, but there's a guy that, is obviously producing at a pro level right now as a young guy. So he could be kind of maybe one of those coming out parties, if you will, here at the World Juniors, if he's given the opportunity and the minutes to do that there with the Finnish team.
And there always is those guys that aren't household names in North America, and then they blow up at this tournament, and all of a sudden everybody's wondering how he went undrafted. So Heinenen's definitely one to watch, and certainly, as you mentioned, Aaron Kiviharju. I think everybody, the hardcore scouting community and hockey fans have been familiar with him for a few years, but like you said, his draft stock took the unfortunate hit due to injury, and now this is his chance this is his redemption tour potentially to help lead Finland to a medal. And you look at that pool that Canada's in, it's definitely, I would say, the stronger pool. It's got Finland as well as the game we all have circled on the calendar, USA on New Year's Eve. We haven't had that in a few years, but we all know, I mean, Russia's obviously not in this tournament anymore, or not as of now. But we've had some real good Canada-USA clashes on New Year's Eve, so I think that's what our New Year's plans are booked as far as that game goes. And we just saw Canada-USA or CHL-USA in the Prospects Challenge. Some of those same players are going to be on these rosters, but that's got to be the game everyone's looking forward to.
I mean, yeah, biggest rival for our country from a hockey perspective, and pretty much any other sport. I mean, we share a border, so yeah, that U.S. team. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't secretly cheering for a couple of those guys when they're not playing Canada, like an EJ Emery, who is a Canadian-born player. Dad is from Compton, California. EJ, grew up in the Vancouver area. Dad was playing in the CF stuff. Know the player and the family quite well. New York Ranger draft pick. Like, you look at the pairings that these guys can make, and I mean, you got Zeev, Byam, Emery, Fisher, Hudson, Minton, and Ralph. Blake Fiddler is sitting there probably looking more like a seventh, eighth. As an 07, they're still sitting at 10D. I don't know what they're going to do if they're going to bring them along for some experience. But I mean, like the depth on that back end in the U.S. is something to be desired, I think, for a lot of teams. I mean, Trey Augustine and net, big body Detroit pick, kind of in Towers maybe, and him and Kosa battling it out in a couple of years for that net, right? As 1A, 1B. Detroit's nets in pretty much in good shape here for a few years if those two pan out the way they are, right? So
Yeah, I think Trey Augustine's got to be one of the favorites for top goaltender at this tournament. The Americans are the defending champions, and he would be a big part of them potentially repeating. Do you feel they are the favorites again, Dan, or who do you have winning gold? What are your sort of medal predictions?
yeah, I do. I actually looking at the roster for the US this year with, you know, the amount of guys like, an Iserman, a Hagens, Leonard, Perot, Stiga, Terrence. That's just some of them. And the one thing the U.S. does that I really like, and I know we don't really do it in Canada because we want to help the CHL and protect the CHL and not pull the best players. But that U.S. national team development program, the chemistry is already there for these guys. A lot of these guys have played together for a year or two. And now they've gone on to college, and I know there's 06s, 05s here, so they were U17s, U18s. They weren't always together, but they still kind of were, and they were living together in Michigan and training together on their separate teams. So that chemistry and that sort of that passion and that U.S. patriotism and swagger is going to be there. They have the best opportunity to get a fast start, in my opinion, because of that. And as you know, in a short tournament, a quick start and putting everybody else on their heels leads to maybe a more favorable quarterfinal, semifinal matchup, and there's no easy route in this tournament per se, but a nicer route, if you will, to a gold medal, where some of these teams that are still trying to figure out how to gel and get together, like Canada, where the players are coming from all over and there's a little familiarity, but not quite as much. It might take them a game or two to kind of get their feet wet. And unfortunately for Canada, they don't really get that because they don't get, Germany or Latvia leading into Finland. I mean, they're going right at it with Finland. And then they're going to get the Germany Latvia game to figure it out right before they play the US. So
Yeah, and I'm not sure how the bracket breaks down. It obviously depends on seeding between Canada, Finland, U.S. Whether Canada, U.S. would have that rematch in the semifinal or have it in the gold medal game. But interesting to see how that New Year's Eve game goes. I think that'll set the tone for the medal round, as it typically does. It's hard to bet against Canada, but like I said, the Americans are stacked. I think Sweden's obviously the favorite coming out of the other pool or the other group as far as. Yeah, against Czechia, Slovakia. Again, if Russia was at this tournament, they'd probably be in that group. But I think Sweden, they're always good in the round robin, and then we'll see what happens when it gets to the quarterfinals. And again, like I said, with seeding, they could end up with a fairly tough, if not quarterfinal opponent. Certainly, they're going to run into a big challenge, a big step up in competition come the semis.
definitely, and we say that because Sweden's just always been that like never lose a round robin game powerhouse. And again, the drafted guys, tons of talent coming out of Sweden. They do it right. They figured out a development model in that country that works for them, and they just keep producing stars or superstars, if you will, coming out of that country. The goaltending in Sweden never really falters. They got 3 drafted goalies there, all 05s. I mean, take your pick, right? Like there's an embarrassment there a little bit too. But the one team that I want to bring up that's over there, and we were talking about that quarterfinal, that could be a tough one. They may not win the pool, but I think they'll give Sweden everything they can handle. Czechia. I really, really, really like that roster. I mean, Rabel and net, Dvorak, Juracek, Port, like there's a lot to that back end. I mean, there's a couple undrafted guys in there that we don't get to see as often. And then up front, I mean, you're looking at Adam Yeko, Saleh, Sikora, Zidlicki. Like there's there's some guys there that can turn some heads, and I wouldn't. If anybody takes Czechia lightly, they're gonna be in trouble.
As we saw at last year's tournament, right? Obviously, Czechia had a good run, and Canada ran into them as well. So I think there's some experience from there. I think you're right. I think Czechia is going to be right there with Sweden as if not the 1 seed, the 2 seed coming out of the other group. So when you get down to that final four, whether it could end up being Canada, USA, Finland, Sweden, but I think Czechia is the dark horse as the sort of the fifth team to watch. And you mentioned kind of the storylines that you're looking forward to, or what you're the prospects you're most excited to see on this stage. For me, it's going to be the battle, the competition for first overall. Obviously, James Hagens from the U.S. And you mentioned the chemistry they have already with guys like Ryan Leonard and Gabe Perreault, and you put Hagens between them. It's going to be a tough line to shut down. Hagens could end up being, I know we said McKenna might have to rise to the occasion for Canada, but Hagens really wants to prove that he is, a step above Porter Martone as a fellow forward, or even Matthew Schaefer, who's now number one on a lot of lists. So I think that's going to be really interesting. And maybe the dark horse there is Victor Eklund from Sweden. That's William Eklund, the San Jose Sharks first round pick, who's a budding talent in the NHL. His younger brother Victor's a top 10 prospect as well. And then even a guy like Logan Hensler. It's a big tournament for him against his peers, an American defenseman who, kind of like Matthew Schaefer. At the start of the year, they were maybe debating who was going to be the top D in the draft class. Schaefer's kind of run away with that because Hensler's making the adjustment to playing against men in the college league. But I think now that he's back against his age group, Hensler's going to be one to watch. And maybe the kid, if he makes Switzerland, and there's no guarantee, but he's part of their selection camp roster. I'll probably butcher his name because it is a new one to me. Jonah Neuenschwander. He's the only 15-year-old kid, the only 2009 born prospect that's still part of these selection camp rosters. He's having a real emergence in Switzerland. The Nino Niederreiter, those type of comparisons. Maybe a Nico Hischier. Obviously, Nico Hischier was a first overall pick out of Switzerland. So I think Jonah Neuenschwander, if he makes the Swiss team, is going to become a storyline throughout this tournament. But who are some of the prospects you're most excited to see on this big stage? I know you mentioned some coming out parties already, but who are some guys that could pop here?
Yeah, I mean, that we've touched on, like McKenna, those guys. Blake Fiddler, if he could crack that USA lineup, is an interesting one, right? Got to watch his dad play for the Rockets quite a bit, right? Vern and stuff. So you're kind of pulling for him a little bit to have a good term if he could crack that roster. It's not set yet. And then just look at one here. There's an 07 forward, that Wojtek Sahar. Mm-hmm. Right there, I think any of these kind of 07 guys, Adam Novotny, right? Like, this is their opportunity to really shine and really show that they belong on that big stage and at that level. This is their chance to push ahead of some of the guys in the draft class that they're kind of competing with right now.
For sure. And as a scout myself, working with the pro hockey group with Jason Bukala and a group of scouts, obviously, we're keeping a close eye on the draft eligible guys, as well as the guys like Heinonen who were passed over in previous drafts that could pop in this tournament. It is an older tournament, generally speaking. The 2005 class that's already been through the draft, but there are a lot of 07s or 06s, 07s at this tournament that are undrafted that are definitely going to be ones to watch. And when you think about the MVP of the tournament, Dan, who comes to mind first there? Because there's so many candidates. I mean, we've name dropped them all, but who comes to mind?
As he wins, I guess. I mean, if you think that Canada's going to win, you're looking at an Ivan Kovic or one of the goalies, probably. A McKenna, maybe a Pat, guys like that. If the U.S. push through and win, a guy like Ryan Leonard, Cole Eiserman, players like that, buy them. Zeev could easily run away with this. I mean, the guys who can still really scoring right for age. Like, there's a plethora of guys that can do it. My boy Aaron hopefully maybe has a good tournament and Finland wins and he gets it. Like, I think it's going to come down to who gets to that final two and that gold medal game. And steals that game for their team. Really, it's probably, in my opinion, just going to take that kind of title.
Yeah, definitely. That's it usually does come down to who stars in the medal round and the gold medal game as far as tournament MVP. And you mentioned a lot of the forwards that could be leading scorers in this tournament. Top D, Axel Sanding Palika from Sweden. I think he's having a big year in the SHL. We've talked about Zeev Byam having a big season in college hockey, leaves as the highest scoring college defender. I think he's going to be awesome and very dynamic for the Americans. And then, Sam Dickinson will probably have to step up for Canada as one of the more go-to guys offensively. I know you mentioned Bo Akey potentially being a power play guy as well. We know Tanner Melendek, kind of a great skater, all-around defenseman as well. But I think, and young Matthew Schaefer may step up as well. But Sam Dickinson's, just outside the top 10 in this year's draft for San Jose. And I think he's definitely a guy that, he went ahead of Byam in the draft. I think he's definitely a guy that could contend there. As well as, like I said, Aaron Kiviharju, if he's the go-to guy for Finland and their power play gets clicking and they start teeing up somebody, whether it's Kasper Halttunen or Emil Hemming, if they can get somebody shooting the way Patrick Laine was last night for his big hat trick against Buffalo, I think if Aaron's teeing somebody up like that, he could definitely be in the conversation for top D as well. And goaltending, like you said, we don't know who's going to start for Canada, Sweden, or even Finland yet. Probably Saarinen, but there's some goaltending decisions to come through the pre-tournament. Czechia, we know Michael Harabel is going to be a stud for them, and obviously USA, Trey Augustine's probably if anybody's going to beat the Americans, they might need a goaltender to outperform Trey Augustine, which will be a tall order.
One guy I forgot to mention too, I had it open and I just missed that tab there. There he is, Lars Steiner. Swiss kid, playing in the queue, 36 points, 29 games. Not to knock on Switzerland, but might not have the same support around him that he does in Miranda there. But I mean, he's putting up points. He's a draft eligible guy, so look to him that if the Swiss are going to do any damage, he's probably going to be a little bit of a catalyst for him too.
And I believe he was on the roster last year's tournament, and he looked good. He was a standout for me already last year, and definitely become a go-to guy for Ped Ticton. So I think that's a good call out as somebody who could be a leader for Switzerland.
Miranda, the Penticton guy was on the roster last year. This is a different guy. This is Lars Steiner. He's playing the Q. We're Miranda. Played U18, U17 last year. First year at the U21.
Right. Okay, yeah. No, that's right. Yeah, it's there's a lot of talent still coming out of the BCHL, even with all the changes that have happened throughout this hockey season. But definitely, there's some guys to watch at this tournament as well. And I know you mentioned Cole Iserman as a guy who could, also fell a little bit in the draft, but could have a big showing at this tournament. A guy like Edouard Saleh, who didn't have a big draft plus 1 year or in the OHL, but now is producing in the AHL. So there's a lot of guys that are going to be fun to watch, and even Sweden's got some forwards as well. Felix Unger Sorum, Carolina prospect, and Anton Wahlberg, a Buffalo prospect, that are doing well in the AHL as underage guys that would normally be playing CHL or whatever if they were North American prospects. So there's a lot of talent throughout this tournament, and it's going to be fun to see how the medal round shakes out.
Yeah, it's always a good time of the year. Like I said, the parents are coming to town here later this week, and having the whole family around watching World Juniors. Just my dad and I, like I was a kid. It's gonna be a fun tournament to watch, and it's probably the most exciting time for hockey fans between this and the Spengler.
For sure. Can't wait for Boxing Day and that New Year's Eve clash with the Americans, Canada, USA. But that's a wrap for the second episode of the Fishbowl Hockey Podcast. So thanks again, Dan, for joining me to preview the World Juniors, and happy holidays to all of our listeners. Enjoy all the World Juniors action. But thanks again, Dan, and all the best with the rest of your hockey season as well.
Thanks, Larry. My pleasure. Anytime you want me on, I'm more than happy to chat with everybody.
Sounds good.